It provides a cultural opportunity for students as well as the community to explore the rich heritage of St. Bernard and the New Orleans area. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Nunez History Lecture Series. We have some diehards in the audience. These are the true faithful. And when we were thinking about tonight, we want to have fairness in everything. We're going to have a vote. Since the heaters were very loud, we were going to let the audience vote about whether y'all wanted to hear the heaters or hear our speaker tonight. But then we thought we better not have a vote. Then we decided that democracy is overrated, and so we thought we would get started on time so that, you know, as we're going to be, the speaker tonight is going to be fighting the cold coming in. All right, so it should be we'll see by the number of the audience who wins that race. But tonight it's going to be a great lecture. Tonight's lecture is Louisiana Influence on the American Revolution, and this is almost too old of a joke to use, but the speaker himself used it. So the speaker is going to be Ron Chapman. And so the reason we knew it was going to be very cold tonight, and so the reason that we chose Mr. Chapman is because he could provide a lot of hot air. You know, so we could... You stole my line. Right. Mr. Chapman told me that joke, but I was going to use it anyway before that. So it's a very easy one to do. All right. But we really appreciate y'all being here tonight. The plan is, hopefully everybody's on the mailing list. If not, on the email or the regular mail list, please sign up in the front. We're going to plan out the entire second half of the school year from February to May. We're going to plan that in December. So look for an email or regular mail. You'll be hearing about all that. So we'll kind of get back into the swing of things and get some good topics and good speakers and all that kind of thing. So I want to go and get started, and I'd like to introduce Mr. Ron Chapman, Assistant Professor of History at Nunez here.
He stole my opening joke. Can't believe that. We see, but actually we didn't know there'd be heaters, so I offered to do a pre-lecture to warm the building up before you got here. Okay, this lecture here is on Louisiana. I'm going to see if my little mouse here works here, with a Spanish flavor. The American Revolution, we have a tendency to view the American Revolution as something that, can you all hear me okay? Is that right? As something that's very remote, that took place in the 13 original colonies, and we didn't become a state till 1812, so as a result, our association with this is somewhat limited. That's not the case. You know, actually, Louisiana played a very critical role in the American Revolution, and Bonnie Pepper told me something I wasn't aware of. Just recently, if I'm not mistaken, Bonnie, it's in the last several years that the Daughters of the American Revolution are now enrolling people from Louisiana into their organization because they've suddenly discovered what an important role the Spanish and New Orleans played in the American Revolution. What I found quite surprising was recently, you know, you always get these textbooks when you're teaching from different publishing companies, and you turn to key areas to find information to see just exactly what their stance is to get their drift. And one of the areas I turned to was this, and they mentioned that after the Battle of Saratoga, which we'll talk about in a second, you know, the French and Spanish declared war on Great Britain. The French participated, but the Spanish did very little. And I was like, excuse me, forget this text, you know. So with that, I'd like to use that as an intro to go on to exactly what we're talking about here. There were actually 15 American colonies, not 13. That's something you're not really familiar with when you hear about it. Go back down here. Canada was number 14, which is kind of a given in the sense that Canada was one of the colonies, but Canada wouldn't rebel. The rebels had hoped they could get Canada to align with them because it would have certainly complicated Great Britain's position, but they wouldn't do so. The other was Florida, especially West Florida. They did not join the rebels, and in fact, they remained steadfastly loyal to Great Britain. When we talk about Florida, I'm sure you've watched the weather, and they refer to the Florida parishes, and pretty soon you'll see why they do that. The people there realized that after the French and Indian War had taken place, France was effectively removed from the United States, or from the North American continent. They gave everything to Spain west of the Mississippi River, including the Isle of Orleans, which I'll show you in a little bit, and everything east of the Mississippi River went to England. So as a result, England got Florida, which had formerly been Spanish territory. When England got the territory, they immediately started populating it. They incorporated their own legal systems. They opened up trade with New Orleans, which is an on-again, off-again situation, and we'll discuss why that was. But there was a tremendous effort to develop the area. The British wanted strong commercial presence, especially at Manchac. We tend to think of Manchac as a few restaurants and things of that sort. But if you geographically, when I show you the position of Manchac, they had very great plans for Manchac, and in fact, they intended to use Manchac to basically divert trade away from the city of New Orleans itself. That's why Spain is going to be keeping a very careful eye on what's going on in Florida. This is serious business between two national powers. So as you can see here, this is the map which basically shows Great Britain here. This is Canada. These are the 13 original American colonies. This is Florida. And this area here is what will be one of the causes of the American Revolution, actually. It's a proclamation of 1763, which sets this aside as Indian territory. And that's what a lot of the colonists are going to be angry about because they want to settle this area. But the key is right here. When Britain got Florida, they put a demarcation line at the Perito River. This was East Florida, this was West Florida, and the capital of West Florida was established at Pensacola. The timetable, it's Native American from God knows when to 1716. Becomes French from 1716 to 1763, and it's British from 63 to 79. So for 16 years, this area is totally under the control of the King of England. Then becomes Spanish again to 1810. Then in 1810, there was a rebellion, and for 74 days, it was called the Republic of West Florida, after which it was absorbed into the United States by President Madison, and to this day, it is now part of the United States. West Florida is British. 1673, they take control, and when they take control, most of the Spanish people leave. Why? They're Catholic. British aren't. They're very strongly Catholic. So as a result, they start removing themselves, and more British start moving into the area. They've ruled for 17 years, and as a consequence, it would become the 14th mainland American colony, and will be divided into East and West. You have to look at the dates here. The American Revolution technically really begins in 1765 with the Stamp Act crisis. Violence doesn't take place till later. But with the Stamp Act crisis is beginning. This is 2 years after this period. As the American Revolution is percolating and becoming more and more violent, people who are loyalists and don't want to be trapped in this violence start looking for somewhere else to go. They start turning to West Florida. If you want a corollary, look at Iraq today. You have the Shiites and the Sunnis fighting it out, but you have large groups of the population that just want peace. They want to get around their lives. They wish they had somewhere to go. These people did. The area was called West Florida. So they started coming in. They start then to establish Manchac as a major port, and their intention was to dredge the Iberville River and divert part of the Mississippi River through Lake Marquardt and Lake Pontchartrain. Can you imagine? You thought the Corps of Engineers did a number on us. I mean, because once you divert the Mississippi River, there's really no telling of how big or how pronounced that diversion would be. But at that time, what they were looking at was the Iberville River's fluctuation of depth was such that they couldn't depend upon the trade. Whereas if they widened it, deepened it, and flushed it through with the Mississippi, they could actually divert trade coming downriver at Manchac, bring it out through the lakes into the Gulf Coast of Pensacola, and turn it into basically a British port rather than the Spanish port at the city of New Orleans. Needless to say, this is causing some consternation on the part of the Spanish. The British were allowed free use of the Mississippi River by the Treaty of 1763, but that's going to be an on-again, off-again situation. And what they're going to be using is when it's off and on sometimes, what they're going to basically be doing is using floating warehouses where they fill their ships up with goods and they just park them in the Mississippi. So technically they're not violating Spanish law but being on Spanish territory, but the people living in Louisiana can paddle their boats out to the ships, get what goods they need, and then paddle away. When O'Reilly took over, after the French threw the Spanish out under Ulloa, he shut down this trade with England. But when Gonzaga gets in after O'Reilly, he realizes the desperate economic situation New Orleans is in. He reopens that trade, but diminishes in his official correspondence with Spain the value. He says it's 15,000 piastres, when actually it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 580,000. The part reason I brought this figure in, because it just shows how vibrant the economy was, the British economy was in West Florida at this time. Basically, how did the British feel about it? The finest and most fertile part of West Florida. If you compare this region to the barren deserts of Canada and Florida, where it made the differences is there. The soil and oak and hickory, they didn't spell that well. Lands is black, brown earth with very little mixture of sand, and the lower river lands are very fertile. The most fertile, beautiful, healthy, and varied lands in the province, or perhaps the whole continent of America, watered by abundance of springs, rivulets, without swamps, and everywhere are spacious clearings. They love the lands of West Florida. They were very rich. At this stage, they're starting to open up indigo plantations. Immigration starts coming in. As more and more loyalists are looking to come in this direction, Britain then decides to provide land grants as they came in. As a consequence, they took veterans from the French and Indian War, welcomed them into the area, and as they found the Natchez district, that's what it was called, because Natchez, Baton Rouge, and Manchac were all part of this. We are in a state of great tranquility here, and I'm happy to say that the inhabitants of this colony are well attached to the Constitution. This is the British governor reporting back to England on the conditions present. As the revolution east grew, immigration into the area started increasing tremendously. By this time, the British then started basically reinstituting the old headright system they used in the 1700s, where they gave 100 acres of land for every man, woman, and child that came into the area. So a family of 5 would be given 500 acres of land of their choice, when they arrived in the area. There's good evidence of their loyalty, is what they had to prove. The point of all this being, secure asylum for well-affected inhabitants of the rebellious colonies who were too weak to resist the violence of the times and too loyal to current measures of those who had allowed and supported the rebellion. Basically what this is showing once again by the documents that this is becoming a true haven for loyalist forces here in the United States. Whoop, went too fast on that, sorry. This is West Florida. And you can see the boundary line here. The top territory is Chickasaw. That's Chickasaw Bluffs, which is the present point of Memphis. This is the Mississippi River. Here's Natchez, Baton Rouge, Manchac. The Isle of Orleans, a lot of people aren't familiar with, is that they got everything west of the Mississippi River went to Spain, including the Isle of Orleans. And it's called that because this is the Isle of Orleans, and we discovered sometimes it's totally underwater. But it's basically surrounded by water. The Mississippi River on one side, the Gulf over here, Lake Baum, Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Maltfeld, the Iberville River connecting to the Mississippi. So this is technically an island. So that's why it went over to Spain. This whole area here is West Florida. This is a British colony, very strongly loyal, with bases at Biloxi, Pensacola, Manchac, Baton Rouge, Natchez, and settlements all in between, up and down these rivers. Spain worries about Britain. As British people start flying into this area, Spain starts becoming disturbed and concerned, just exactly what are their intentions. But Spain has its own concerns, okay? Even though they're a traditional enemy of Great Britain, and they really relish the fact that Britain had a problem on their hands with the colonies, what are they going to do about this? I mean, if they endorse a colonial revolution and help the Americans out, what kind of a signal does that send to their own colonies? They are a nation dependent upon Spanish colonies. What message is sent to the French? Hadn't the French just rebelled against the Spanish? Hadn't they just, O'Reilly just come, executed 6 Frenchmen, arrested several others, seized all their property, and imposed military control? Now you're going to turn around and endorse a revolution? What sort of hypocrisy is that? Could Spain get drawn into the war? If they start helping out the American rebels and Britain becomes angry, Britain might become angry enough to declare war on Spain for helping them out, in which case now Spain has a major war in its hands with the greatest power in the world at that time, which was Great Britain. That's something to think about. However, if the Americans win this thing, Great Britain's off the North American continent. They're out of Pensacola, they're out of Mobile, they're no longer threatening New Orleans and this whole area here, and they're also not threatening the regular Spanish trade routes. So this has its advantages. Also, you got to look at the fact that, what about these Americans, Al? I mean, these are kind of a rebellious group of people. We may get rid of the British, but what are we going to have with the Americans coming in? So you can see the Spanish have a lot of consternation. It's exactly how they're going to fall in this situation, what they're going to do. But the underlying concern is their fear of Great Britain's growing presence against the mouth of the Mississippi River in the city of New Orleans. So as a consequence, as the situation, the American Revolution starts percolating, Spain starts getting involved. At first, they get involved quite secretly. This would be under Governor Luis de Gonzaga. And there's a Spaniard for you, huh? Look at that. He's the first governor to get involved in the American Revolution. What he's going to do is he's going to get drawn in because he's so concerned about the growing threat of Great Britain. What happens to him, this is May 1776, 2 months before the Declaration of Independence, a gentleman by the name of Captain Gibson comes down river from Fort Pitt and presents Gonzaga with a letter from General Charles Lee, who's number 2 to George Washington. The Continental Congress is 100% behind this, and what they're doing is they're requesting some help, any help they can possibly give. He's requested to sell ammunition. You can imagine how Britain would feel if Spain starts selling ammunition to the American rebels. They want $10,000 worth. As a result, Gonzaga turns to an intermediary by the name of Oliver Pollock. We'll talk about him a little bit more in a bit. He's one of the great unsung heroes of the American Revolution. And he's a very wealthy man who operates boats, so he basically uses a draft on his personal accounts for $10,000 worth of ammunition. They load it up, they send it upriver, and start supplying the American rebels. This process will continue for a while, surreptitiously supplying people, and actually most of the arms that George Rogers Clark gets when he conquers the Northwest come through Spanish New Orleans. So you have a role playing right up in the intimacy of the American Revolution as well. Spain would find itself supplying them on a regular basis now because Pollock will be throwing himself totally behind the American cause. Nevertheless, he's concerned because if word gets out, this could backfire. Luis Gonzaga is an older man. He's not all that healthy at this stage in his life, and he's nervous, very nervous. But he has a commandant as the head of his troops. His name is Don Bernardo de Galvez. He will later become governor, actually very soon thereafter become governor, who is not quite as concerned. This is Galvez. I'm going to talk just a second about 2 people real quick, because these are the 2 great unsung heroes you never hear about in the American Revolution, one being Bernardo de Galvez. He's a member of a highly respected family. His father is governor of the Canary Islands, which is very critical, because this is what the Isleños comes in. And this is the American Revolution is why they're here, okay? His uncle is the Viceroy of Mexico, so he's extremely well placed and highly influential. His early years, his dad sends him over to his uncle where he fights the Apache Indians, displays his ability in the battlefield as being very brave and very cunning. Having accomplished that, he goes back to Spain, where for some reason he's sent to the French Naval Academy to learn how to operate on ships. This will again play a very important role in the American Revolution. Once there, though, he learns things French. He develops an attraction for language, culture, wine, and cuisine. So that's what makes him an excellent governor over the somewhat unruly French, because he has such an attraction to French culture. When he comes here, as I said, he came as commander, but on September 19th, 1776, again, note the dates, that 1776, this is now after the Declaration of Independence, he is now named governor, okay? 1778, the situation now, he sees is starting to degenerate with Great Britain. He turns to his father and asks his father for some help. His father starts sending over the Isleños. They're sent over as soldiers. As I understand them, they were hoping to get them 5 foot 3 inches tall. That was considered a big man back then. They came over with their families, and he located them on 4 locations. On the map, if you look at it, Galvez Town, Barataria, Valenzuela, and St. Bernardo, which at the time was La Concepcion. On a map, basically what he's doing, he's positioning them critically and strategically between himself and the British. That's his intent. That's what these people are here for. For his part, Oliver Pollock is an Orleanian who'll end up spending, at that time, if you can imagine, $370,000 of his own money in the American Revolution. He's a great salesman, and in fact, the reason he gets himself in a position he's in is because when O'Reilly took over Louisiana after the rebellion, there was a food shortage of flour. As a good businessman, Pollock shows up with a ship full of flour, offers it to Gonzaga at less than cost. Of course, Gonzaga's thrilled, and O'Reilly's thrilled about this, so he becomes friends with Pollock, and at that point he opens up the port of New Orleans to Pollock. By having open access to the port of New Orleans, Pollock, within a relatively short period of time, is operating 300 and 400 boats up and down the Mississippi River and making a substantial amount of money. When the revolution breaks out, that's why they turn to him. He not only gives supplies, he gives money, he uses up his line of credit. He personally participates in some of Galvez's Mississippi River campaigns. When his money runs out, he goes through all of his credit for the American Revolution. When the revolution is over with, he goes to Congress. He has a list of all of his expenses. He asks to be reimbursed. Congress gives him a cold shoulder, sends him packing on his way. He comes back to New Orleans, goes to Cuba to rebuild his estates. When he arrives in Cuba, he's arrested and thrown in prison for being in debt. And it's through the good graces of Galvez that he's finally freed. So here's an interesting man with an interesting story that we really don't know enough about. But nobody in the East Coast knows anything about him and the role he plays. So now we have the situation where the American Revolution is heating up. The British are filling in the West Florida. The Spanish are getting concerned. The British are now operating out of Canada and coming down the Mississippi River. The Continental Congress is getting concerned. They recognize that there's a problem with Natchez, with Baton Rouge, and with Manchac. What should they do? A man by the name of James Willing steps up. He's an interesting character because the Continental Congress turns to him when he arrives at their door with this plan. So January 11th, 1778, Willing, who has basically made a lot of enemies in Natchez because of his personality and some of his shenanigans, goes up, gets the blessing of the Continental Congress, gets 30 soldiers, and as he works his way downstream, he collects a bunch of individual boatmen and supporters, and by the time he's finished, he's got about 130, 140 men, at which point, in a little gunboat called Rattletrap, and at which point he starts basically working his way downriver, and he attacks Natchez, Manchac, British settlements all along the way. And the people he didn't particularly like before, he burns their estates, seizes everything they have, captures some of them personally, loads everything on boats, and starts bringing it all down to New Orleans. When he gets down here, he starts selling it. But rather than selling everything and giving the money to Congress, he sells it and splits it up among his own people, which then starts raising consternation as to what his real purpose was all about. Oliver Pollock is angry because he would like to have some of that money paying him back for his expenses. Willing refuses to do so. Instead, he leans on Pollock to support his men till finally Pollock has enough of it. The British, having heard about what was going on, now sent ships up the Mississippi River demanding that he be taken over and be given to them. Galvez is now getting caught in a bind between England and Spain over the issue of this guy Willing. So the situation now on the Mississippi River is starting to seriously heat up. Again, you seldom hear about this in anything you read in the American Revolution. Okay, kind of went through that. He's captured by the British when he tries to escape down the Mississippi River, and he spends 2 years in prison because he's an officer as a captain, and they have a prisoner exchange, and basically nobody wants him, so he has to sit in there until the end of the war. So this is an area, this is not a very clear map, but this shows his operations where he comes down this way, and once he gets up around Chickasaw Bluffs, this is a whole area all the way to New Orleans that he basically terrorizes. Great Britain versus Spain. Now the two big boys are going to get involved. What happens is Galvez once again shuts off trade with Great Britain. And the reason he does that is because he knows the situation is deteriorating and he wants the British out of his territory because he doesn't want any spies around. He's got to keep control. Okay? They did not supply British support because the British there, even though they have a lot of settlements, Campbell, the governor, is requesting from Great Britain more and more troops. From General Clinton in the New England area, he's requesting more and more troops, but they're being pressed with the battles of the American Revolution, and they tell him basically just depend upon your Indian allies as much as you can. They don't really perceive the threat as much as he does where he is. It's the Battle of Saratoga that turns the tide, an incident that occurs in the piney woods, I should say the hardwoods and lakes of northern part of New York City, when Burgoyne, on a major attack, comes down, is defeated by the Americans, and 5,000 British soldiers and a major general are captured. This is the turning point of the American Revolution, because at this point on, people start realizing the war's been going on now for quite a few years. If you look at 1765, you can just about imagine it's 12 years of strife going on. And the British have lost a major army. It's at this stage that Spain and France both decide to recognize the United States as an independent nation. The result of this is England becomes angry and declares war. April 29th, 1779, Great Britain sends a letter to Governor Campbell laying out a plan that his job is to immediately invade New Orleans and take over the city of New Orleans in the name of Great Britain. The troops would be forthcoming to help him do that, and he's supposed to work with his Native Americans allies to accomplish that task. June 21st, Spain declares war on Great Britain. As soon as Galvez gets word of this, he immediately starts planning his attack on the British territories. So again, you can see the American Revolution is now right in the heart of Louisiana. The trick is communications. There's no email, there's no fax machine, there's no telephone, so nobody really knows that a declaration of war has taken place. Galvez knows for sure. Governor Campbell has an indication. He's been told to prepare for an attack, but he has nothing. And besides which, this letter informing him to attack is in the mail, so to speak. He hasn't received it yet. So he's blindly just sitting there, not knowing what's going on. But because of Galvez's political connections, he learns very early on that there's a state of war in existence. As a consequence, he starts his preparations. He begins his attack September 9th, 1779. And it's not till the second week of September that Campbell even gets this letter informing him to attack New Orleans. That's how bad the communications are. So basically, Galvez is able to get the jump on him because he has information that Campbell does not have. Campbell did have spies, and spies were warning him that something was afoot in New Orleans, but he elected not to believe them. Now, why that is, I don't know. But it's always possible that he might have partially believed them, but for him to have done anything might have triggered an action by itself. So he probably figured the best course of action was doing nothing until he had some sort of certitude. This delay on his part will be his undoing. So this is the battle, basically, and what happens is coming out of New Orleans, Galvez is going to march upriver, take Manchac. He's going to go up and take Baton Rouge. He's then going to go up and take Natchez. This is just an overview. He'll return back to New Orleans. He'll then branch out and hit Mobile. He'll return back to New Orleans. He'll come back out and he'll take out Pensacola. So in essence, the Spanish in New Orleans are going to basically seize this entire section of this loyal British colony. His operations. He enlisted the support of slaves who fought for their freedom. You had members of the French militia, Isleños, local Indians, Spanish soldiers. There's a total of 667 men. He believes that a strong defense is an offense, and as a consequence, he plans to attack. But before he can leave, imagine that, a 3-day hurricane comes up and upsets all of his plans. So he's got to wait. He decides to reaffirm everything. His boat's sunk, his men are scattered all over, his supplies are destroyed, but he's persistent, so just like us people in St. Bernard Parish, he's tough, so he decides to put things back together again and begins his attack. The key is he doesn't even let his men know what's going on. All they know is they're going on a march. It's not until he gets to Manchac and he's lined up outside that he informs them that a state of war exists and they're about to attack the British. He gets there on September 6th. So this is the road here. He goes up and he gets to Manchac. Well, what happens is, right about this time, the British are aware that he's on the move, So they leave a few men at Manchac and basically retreat up to Baton Rouge, where they're going to set up the major fort, and they prepare themselves there. So the conquest of Manchac, as Galway puts it, was certainly not a great exploit. They assaulted the fort. The people immediately surrendered. He took it. He tarries there for a number of days because a number of men are now sick with dysentery and what have you. He lets them recover, get their strength back, feeds them, rests them, and then begins the long march up to Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge would be a different story. The fort they have there is at the present site of LSU. The British have heavily defended it. They've dug a ditch 18 feet wide, 9 feet deep. They've placed a lot of cannon around it. They have a lot of British soldiers there. Galvez's concern is he doesn't want a frontal attack because he doesn't want to lose a lot of his men. They're too loyal to him. They're too valuable to him, and the families would never forgive him. What he does is look at the fort, and he realizes that there's a wooded area off near the front of the fort. So he takes some of his men to the wooded area and has them cut down trees, build fires, and tell them just make as much noise as you possibly can. The British are convinced that's where the Spanish are moving from, so as a consequence, they start taking all their weapons and cannons and rolling them up to prepare for the frontal assault, while Galvez has actually worked around the back of the fort and quietly building all of his emplacements there. On the coming of the morning, he opens fire from the back of the fort. The British are totally surprised, and before they can turn their guns around, he blows holes in the back of the walls, able to overrun the British at Baton Rouge, and as a consequence, he takes the Baton Rouge, right? So that's the end of that one after a few hours of bombardment. The next step is to take Natchez. Now, if you look at Natchez, you can see at this time there's this tremendous, they used to call it Natchez under the hill. This is even before that happened, so it's much larger. Here's the bluff. Here's Fort Panama, which is the site of the original Fort Rosalie, and here's the little town of Natchez up in here. Galvez realizes that assaulting this fort would be extremely difficult, but he also finds there's only about 80 soldiers there. Let's see if I can, there you go. Here's another view of the fort up on the bluff, so you can see attacking that would be a formidable problem. What he does is, he turns around to Alexander Dixon, who's the commander of the fort in Baton Rouge, and tells him, look, you've taken over Baton Rouge, you've surrendered, I want you to send a letter, and Oliver Pollock's going with you to the citizens, demanding that the Natchez fort surrender as well. He's not in a position to do anything. Dickinson agrees to it, pens the letter. As a consequence, Captain Barbier carries the letter with Captain Foster, with the Galvez's men, Oliver Pollock, with his letter to the citizens. They arrive, and the people in Natchez didn't even know a state of war existed. They found out they surrendered. So they're somewhat taken aback by that. As a consequence, Fort Panama falls down, and Galvez, in a brief period of time, in very aggressive action, has now completely cleared the Mississippi River of the British presence. And now it is totally under Spanish control, and as a consequence of the state of war, American control. Being opened without being threatened, now goods can flow up to the rebels up in Philadelphia, Fort Pitt, to George Rogers Clark, and also working their way to George Washington's troops. He now controls it. I have the happiness to inform you that His Most Catholic Majesty, the King of Spain, has declared the independence of the United States of America. By the latest accounts of the northward, I reason to hope it is not distant when the entire foes will be driven from the continent. That's Pollock to the citizens of Natchez. Galvez demonstrated his capacity as a general, his tactic, vision, and planning, disregard for timid advisors, because a lot of people thought it was foolish for him to do this, faces the disasters of hurricanes, and he's always inspiring his troops to stand with him. On top of that, you have operations in the lake. Along the Iberville Passage, where we talked about they wanted to widen, and on the lakes Pontchartrain and Maurepas, Spanish gunboats that Galvez has armed speed out of Bayou St. John. They captured galleys supplying the Manchac area. They captured 2 British cutters that are operating there. And Carlos Grand Prix, commanding the Creole militia, sets up 2 posts and takes them over on the Amite River. In the lake battles, William Pickles, commanding the American privateer Morris, takes over the West Florida, which was a British ship of war, small because of the depth of the lake that had been terrorizing the area for a number of months. As the Spanish put it, it was most unbelievable that he should have captured it. He realized that the ship he was outgunned, so he charged right forward, tied up onto it, and the men just jumped over the side and physically took over the troops themselves. After that, they hoisted the Spanish flag on the West Florida, made it a Spanish vessel, and controlled the lake themselves with it. Following that, they took the North Shore, Bayou Lacombe, and that's really the early pronunciation of Tangipahoa River. They then took several other ships as you go through here. Vincente Rilou took the ships and 56 soldiers, and basically the 430 leagues of the best land along the Mississippi River with better established and support fur trade were now subjected by Spain. On the day that Galvez took Baton Rouge, Pickles raised the American flag over the North Shore. So you now have, within a short period of time, that entire section of West Florida has now fallen to Spanish troops. This is this area right up around here. The next question is, where do you go from here? Next is Mobile. Galvez turned his attention to the Gulf Coast, and as King of Spain put it, the principal object of my forces in America during the war against England shall be to expel them from the Gulf of Mexico and the banks of the Mississippi River. At this point, Mobile is the main line of supply for Pensacola. Some had argued that he should take Pensacola first. Galvez insisted upon taking it strategically. As a result, in 1779, he prepares his expedition. He attacks Fort Charlotte. He embraces it. He attacks it visually. And within a relatively short period of time of being bombarded by Galvez's troops, the British run up the white flag, and as a consequence, Galvez now has Mobile. So he's working his way towards the east. This is the commander of Fort Charlotte. His next mission is Pensacola. He makes an attempt. He plans an attack on Pensacola in 1779, but he finds out he can't get the support that he needs from the Spanish crown to pull this off. Finally, he organizes a Junta de Guerra, which is basically, an act of war, a group of war, where they sit down and discuss the attacks on Pensacola. They finally make all of their preparations, and a 3-day hurricane comes and wipes everything out again. So obviously, hurricanes are not something that are strange in this particular area. His fleet is spread completely around the Gulf. Some of them end up as far away as Veracruz. He's got to gather them all back to Havana again, and now at this stage, he's got to convince the government in Havana to support him once again in his efforts to take Pensacola. He does that. He comes up with his plan for Pensacola. The British at one point now see that what he's doing, they've tried to plan a counterattack against Mobile. They actually launch it, and they had the Spanish severely outnumbered, but because of the ability of the Spanish to outfight the British, and especially, almost like the American battle here, the Battle of New Orleans, they killed the chief officers of the British. The soldiers don't know what to do, being disciplined like they are without officers. The Indians, when they see the officers fall, the Indian allies run away, so the British attempt to retake Mobile is defeated, and Galvez is left holding Mobile. He then concentrates on Pensacola once again. So, he abandons, this is the attack here, so this is the area of Pensacola. This is an early map. His attack's going to be, he's going to come up here, he's now got the support from Havana of the Spanish Navy. His idea is to come right up to this level here, take Santa Rosa Island, march across Santa Rosa Island and set up an encampment here, bring his ships, this is the fort, so he's got to run the guns here with his forts, reinforce his men, move inland, and then strike the fort from land. This is an ambitious plan, especially since word is that the British are sending reinforcements, both in English and in soldiers down, and the spies are telling him they're approaching the fort. If he loses this, he can lose everything. Yo solo. 1780, he reorganizes his plans. Let us reflect a long time on what is to be decided. The king decreed that the theater of war should be in America. So basically, the King of Spain is saying the war between him and England will be on the Gulf Coast, not necessarily anywhere else. Galvez is given control of all the forces. As I said, his first move is to take Santa Rosa Island. Even though he's given complete control, there's always a problem with an admiral because he ultimately feels responsible for the fleet. And Admiral Carbo does not agree with Galvez. When Galvez talks about running the guns through the Sound, Carbo says there's no possible way. My ships are going to run aground. They're going to be destroyed by the fort's firepower. They hold a council of war on the ship. Galvez realizes he can't change the admiral's mind. The captains in the Navy want to go along with Galvez, but they have to follow the orders of the admiral. Galvez becomes angry, walks off the ship, goes to his own ship, hoists up his own ensign and his own flag and says, "I'll do it alone, you'll solo," and he charges the guns of the British by himself. Once he accomplishes that and makes it through, at that point, then the admiral is somewhat chagrined because he's embarrassed. His soldiers are leaning on him, or his captains are leaning on him more and more. He relents. He allows his ships to sail through, but he still steadfastly refuses to bring his flagship through. The rest of his troops follow Galvez, and they go run the guns. When they get to the other side, they reinforce the soldiers and begin moving across the island. For this, the King of Spain will put your solo on Galvez's coat of arms, along with the ship. March 18th, he enters the pass. I covered all of that. And on the 24th, they free. As you can see, there's got a bit of a distance. We're running from November all the way to March. At Pensacola, the reinforcements arrive for Galvez. He invests the fort. He digs trenches. He's looking over his shoulder because the British are starting to come down to reinforce it. He doesn't know if he has enough time to pull this thing off. All of a sudden, and the world of history is like that, there's a sudden change of fate. On March 8th, a lucky shot from one of the Spanish batteries enters the powder magazine and blows up the fort. About 80 soldiers are killed. Many, many, many more are wounded. As a result, they've lost all their gunpowder. The whole side of the fort is blown open. The men are in terrible point of disarray. The British then meet with Galvez. Galvez orders that they surrender, at which point they hoist the flag. When the British reinforcements send their scouts down to see what the situation is, what they see is the total destruction of the fort and the surrender taking place. As a result, they then back up, go back, retreat, and leave. Galvez has now successfully taken Pensacola as well as everything else. In order to prevent a further effusion of blood, I propose to your excellency a cessation of hostilities until articles of capitulation can be considered and prepared. That's from the British commander, Governor Cabell. Pensacola now belongs to the King of Spain. Back up in Natchez, what happens is when this is all taking place, somehow rumors spread that Galvez was killed. And as a consequence, some of the British subjects there decided to retake the fort. Now, the thing they did back then, it was called good behavior, paroled on good behavior. So when Galvez took over Natchez the first time, he let the citizens stay. He let everybody stay in place under the fact that on their code of honor, they would respect the fact that they were now Spanish citizens. What happens when word gets out that they think Galvez is dead, the British then decide to retake the fort. This is a violation of the code of honor. Galvez is furious about this and then launches a reinvasion of the Natchez territory. In fact, before Galvez gets there, some of the British are even talking about executing the Spanish soldiers that Galvez had left in control of Fort Panama. So as a consequence, when they found out that he had won the war in Pensacola, panic breaks out. Some of the men stay to meet Galvez and try to negotiate and apologize. They will be captured by Galvez and imprisoned for a short time and then released. Some of the others, who are really the real ringleaders, run off and end up living almost the rest of their lives with either the Chickasaw Creek Indians. Some go as far away as the Carolinas to find rebel lines. So now he's once again secured Natchez. Okay? So this is basically his attacks. He takes Manchac. He takes Baton Rouge, he takes Natchez, he takes Mobile, he takes Pensacola, and he takes all of the lakes in the North Shore. So what you have here is a situation where the Spanish and the American Revolution have taken all of West Florida by military means and are now in the process of being prepared to threaten East Florida should the conflict continue. The conflict along the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico lasted from June 1778 to June 1781. It's a 3-year campaign that's waged during the American Revolution. When the British surrendered the treaty that established the United States of America, Spain was victorious as a consequence. Spain would gain New Orleans and freedom of the control of the Mississippi River. They would get all of East and West Florida back, which they had lost in the treaty that ended the French and Indian War. They would control the mouth of the Mississippi River and have the honor of participating in the defeat of their great enemy, Great Britain. Now, one of the problems with this is There'll be tensions between the new country, the United States, and Spain over the territory between the 31st parallel, which is the present little border of Louisiana, and the Natchez District. Because when Great Britain signed the treaty with the United States, it established the border at the 31st parallel. But when Great Britain signed a treaty, a separate treaty ending the war with Spain, they established the border at Chickasaw Bluffs around Memphis. So as the consequence, with these two treaties ending one war, you have a strip of contested territory in the middle there that won't be settled between the United States and Spain until the Treaty of 1795, after the United States government is actually set in power under the Constitution. So the end result is, no denying that Governor Bernardo de Galvez and the Spanish soldiers defeated Great Britain's loyalist 14th colony, Florida. This occurred despite the fact that few history books or accounts of the American Revolution acknowledged the contribution of the Spanish and the people of New Orleans for their critical contributions to the establishment of the United States of America. So this is it. Spain now occupies, until we get to the, I lost the battery here now, until we get to the Louisiana Purchase, Spain will occupy all of this area, the Isle of Orleans, they'll get Florida back, and this is the contested area of conflict between the two, disputed area between the treaties. The United States treaty with Great Britain puts the line here. The Spanish treaty with Great Britain puts the line up here. So the tension between these two nations will exist over this piece of territory, which is called the Natchez District. This here then is the final map, which shows the lands that are laid out. And again, it highlights this particular area and shows what Spanish Louisiana, which will then, in 1803, become the Louisiana Purchase. I don't know if you've ever been down Interstate 12, but if you drive down Interstate 12, you're going to see this sign on the side of the road. It's Republic of West Florida. And what that refers to is this area of West Florida will remain Spanish after the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson thinks that he gets this area in a Louisiana Purchase. When he finds out he doesn't get it, he's not going to press the issue, but legally he thinks it's his. Madison will legally believe it's his. The British subjects that are living in this area are going to be under Spanish control, but after the Louisiana Purchase and the whole area is basically American, these people are going to become somewhat angry at the way they're being treated by the Spanish. They don't like the corruption. They don't like some of the legal things that are going on. So they're going to rebel against the Spanish. They will establish their own republic, the Republic of West Florida. They'll draft their own flag, this particular flag, and for 74 days they will be an independent nation until finally they sue to meet with the United States. They'll then become angry because when they meet with the United States, with President Madison, they consider themselves an independent nation and should be treated with proper accord. Madison goes back to Jefferson's interpretation that they always were part of the Louisiana Purchase and just simply marches in. As a consequence, some of the rebels who broke from Spain decide that they want to go to war against the United States. And the rest of the population says, are you nuts? We wanted to be part of them anyway. It really isn't that important. So the leaders of that rebellion, Mr. Skipworth, decides maybe it's best not to shed any American blood. He hauls this flag down at his little fort at Baton Rouge and hoists up the American flag, and that's what ends it. So next time you're driving down the interstate on 12, look for that flag. And next time you hear Bob Breck or one of the weathermen talk about the weather in West Florida, you now know a little bit more about it. Thank you so much. I hope there wasn't more than you wanted to know.
Caught me kind of unaware, as I was expecting to be at least 45, 50 more minutes before we started slowing down. Let's give Mr. Chapman another hand. All right, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. It was a great lecture, and we look forward to seeing you in February.